The Goodman Bank series was created with the generosity of Sherry Banks-Cohn, who created this in honor of her father, Goodman Banks. And it's been a real pleasure to see how these artists have interacted and what they've done for the KO community. You may remember Martha Mook from last spring, who was here. She did a terrific job with our musicians, and in April we'll have the second of our Goodman Banks series events, which is an awesome percussion quartet called So Percussion. They are awesome as well, so you're going to really enjoy them. So to introduce today's artist is Bridget Bernier.
Maria Molteni, originally from Nashville, is a Boston-based multimedia artist, educator, and organizer. Trained in traditional painting, drawing, and printmaking at Boston University, her practice sprung from observation and formalism. It has since grown to incorporate performance, research, collaboration, and social engagement. Using grassroots and DIY creative projects as tools, her work has been replicated nationally and internationally by organizers and educators alike. In the last 2 years, she's worked with over 200 youth and teens from 12 Boston neighborhoods as an artist in residence for the MFA Boston and the City of Boston. Together, they realized elaborate museum and public installations that address social justice in the context of community basketball and the global textile industry. In 2010, she founded the international collective New Craft Artists in Action. In spring of 2016, the NCAA was invited to share their work with the Congressional Maker Caucus on Capitol Hill. Molteni has completed fellowships at Vermont Studio Center, Elsewhere Living Museum, the Philippines, Mildred's Lane, PS1 MOMA Studios, the Berwick Research Institute's Bumpkin Island Art Encampment, and Sub Sampson. She has exhibited in many local and regional places such as LA, Berlin, Quebec City, and New York City. Molteni shows up for her community beyond her art practice as a member of the Boston Rowing Center, outreach co-chair of her live work artist community, Midway Artist Studios, and a board member of the Boston LGBTIAQ Artist Alliance, as well as Voces de Cambio, an after-school arts program for Indigenous girls in Guatemala. Please join me in welcoming our 2017 Goodman Banks visiting artist, Maria Molteni. You
did a great job. Hello, thanks for being here, everybody. I usually start out, well, first of all, I've had an amazing week. It's been so fast, but I've been really enjoying being here. The school is amazing, has so many wonderful resources and students. So I really appreciate the opportunity of getting to work with y'all. I usually start off by showing, I say y'all because I'm from the South, people think it's funny, but I usually show off by starting showing some of the old work that I was making when I first got out of undergraduate school. I went to a very traditional painting program at Boston University. I did a lot of sort of large oil figure paintings, and when I got out of school, a lot of my friends moved away, either back to where they were from or to New York. And I decided to stay in Boston and sort of get to know this city that I've been going to school in for 4 years. I didn't like being alone in my studio all the time because I was so used to being among my peers in the school setting. So I tried to find ways of being social and making art at the same time. I lived in a little neighborhood called Lower Alston for 6 years in Boston. And it's kind of a crowded, funny, awkward little space with all these triple-decker, kind of classic Boston triple-decker houses. So I started just packing up these little paint kits and walking around my neighborhood and just sitting on the sidewalk and painting houses, kind of painting these little portraits and showing all the sorts of ways that families would express themselves through the stuff in their yards. Some of it is invented, and some of it is based on stories that my neighbors would tell me as they walked by. So it became kind of this like socially engaged thing. I would have my headphones in because I didn't want to be bothered, but then I realized I was missing out on a lot of really interesting conversations that added to the content of my work. So these are just these tiny little paintings. I've been making these huge paintings, but these were these tiny, modest little paintings that I really enjoyed making. Again, just portraits of my neighborhood. So as I moved my practice into, I was still making objects and even making kind of, traditional painted objects. But I like this idea, this practice of walking around my neighborhood, being outside, engaging with spaces, and learning from the environment. So this is a little bit of a jump, but I have a lot to show you today. So I actually played basketball for 10 years. I was a big athlete growing up. And when I first got to college, I was like, man, I don't know how to make sense of all this. I'm an artist, I'm an athlete, I spent so many years practicing, and now I'm not really playing anymore. But when I got out of school, the pieces kind of fell into place. It made sense that I could actually make art about my whole life, my whole lived experience as an athlete. So part of this observing as I was walking around my neighborhood was I was noticing that there are all these basketball hoops that don't have nets. And who in here likes to shoot hoops? Yeah, who knows how much it sucks to play basketball without a net, right? You can't see, you don't hear the swish, you can't tell if it went in, it's hard to aim. So I was actually just teaching myself how to knit and crochet. I wanted to find new media to work in, partially because I wanted to continue working very large, but I didn't have space to store these huge, squared wooden objects like paintings. So I was trying to find ways of working soft. And I also wanted to bring, this like athleticism and this physical activity back into my work. So I basically taught myself how to make a basketball net because that was more familiar to me than a sweater or a dress at the time. And decided to start putting them up on hoops in my neighborhood. I invited a few friends that were a lot better at knitting and crochet than I was to help me teach other people how to do it. We organized some workshops. And then we became a collective. And when I say a collective, it's actually an open collective. Anyone in the world can be part of it. There are kind of a core there's sort of a core group that operate out of Boston that started it, but we started calling ourselves the NCAA, which everyone knows stands for New Craft Artists in Action, right? And of course, that's tongue-in-cheek. The National Collegiate Athletic Association has existed long before us, but we decided to kind of redefine the culture of athletics and art, according to our own values, right? And create the rules of our own game. So this is empty net syndrome, which we seek a cure to by making our own nets, as I said. So here's one of our workshop circles. And here's some of the youth that I was working with last year in Dorchester, Boston, working on finger knitting some nets. So sometimes we do these really elaborate knitted nets with knitting needles and crochet hooks, but you can also make them right off of your hands. And these are just some of the places that we've installed nets all over the world. Here's one in Los Angeles, and funny enough, I don't know if anyone's learned about Chris Burden, but he actually made that backboard. He's a famous artist who passed away recently, but I like to consider it a collaboration with Chris Burden, even though he doesn't know about it. This is also in Los Angeles. This was at a book launch. Pittsburgh. You feel free to read them out with me if you want. Chicago. Detroit. And there's many more. I think I have more included. But this is a book that my collective put together. It was going to be a tiny zine, but we couldn't stop. We started working on it. We went further and further, and it's basically a knit and crochet instruction manual. I have a copy of it. It's under my notes. I have a copy of it with me, so anyone's welcome to look at it later. But we basically, from scratch, drew knit and crochet instructions to teach you if you've never even done it before, and we put out a call across the country for nets, so that if artists wanted to make nets and include the designs for their nets, we could publish them in the book. So this is literally the manual on how to make basketball nets. And we did it. We ran a Kickstarter, and we raised $10,000 and printed 1,000 copies of the book. So these are some more international places. Then we could get the book out there. We had people writing saying, how do I make a net? How do I make a net? And it was really hard to explain to them if I was nowhere near them. So this way we could ship the book out and even include PDFs online. And suddenly our nets were in South Africa, Budapest. This is cool because they actually have a practice of putting the net up every time, like the way you would bring your own, tennis balls to a court or something like that. It's not assumed there will be a basketball net. So when my friend Zsuzsanna Szegedi, who's a Hungarian artist, brought this net to Budapest, they were like, yeah, we got it, and just kind of hopped up on the hoop and put it up there. That one's made out of plastic bags, by the way, partially. Yeah, they don't last as long, but they make a nice swish. This is in the Philippines. This is a really cool story because a friend of mine just showed up to this art festival in a town that did not have a basketball hoop at all. And so they're like, oh, that's kind of a cool net. I wonder what we should do with it. And someone drove to a nearby town and bought the actual metal rim, brought it back, and then they cut down a tree and found an old pallet, dug a hole, and basically built a hoop entirely for the net. So now they play basketball all the time. And basketball is actually huge in the Philippines. They're obsessed with it. So this is also in the Philippines. This is in Zamboanga City in a region called Mindanao, which there's actually been a lot of conflict in. So it was really amazing to get to work with the women there. And we worked with boys and girls, but it was particularly enriching working with the young girls there. So, so we've done a lot of projects. I'm going to show you a few more later, but a recent project we did, we really wanted to, do up the whole thing. It's like, why just make the nets? Like, there's so many aspects of basketball, maybe we could take over the whole game and do it in a huge impact sort of way. So last year, I was actually an artist in residence for the city of Boston. There's a brand new program where they choose 10 local artists to work with different community centers in different neighborhoods. And so I was paired with a community called the Dorchester Perkins Center. And we worked together for about 8 months. We did all sorts of different projects, and I don't have all those photos, but we got to know each other. And together we designed a basketball court. Hold on one second. Okay, so I should have put these first. These are the kind of drawings that we worked on over the year. I had youth as young as 5, as old as 16, working on these different drawings of their dream court. We thought of our dream mascots. We just took apart the game of basketball like it was a pizza or something and came up with all the ingredients and found ways to make them more creative and more expressive. So this is the final product. This is actually a 20,000 square foot basketball court. So it's 2 enormous courts with a bunch of space in the middle. And before, I wish I had a before picture, but it was just like gray and black. And all of that kind of dead space in the middle and the margins wasn't activated at all. So we hope that this would invite more people to feel comfortable on the court. All sorts of people would be able to feel comfortable on the court, and all this kind of dead space could be used. You see we put hopscotch in there. This is actually before we took the tape off, but in the corner there's Foursquare, and then you just got all kinds of cool designs that you can play with as you like. You can see in the 2 orange circles it says Boston's Got Wings. So that was the only thing that we kept from the previous court, because basically Red Bull had painted the court before, and it was, again, pretty boring. It was just gray and blue and not any designs or anything. And Red Bull's slogan is like, Red Bull gives you wings. But one of the exercises we did in class was we said, did Red Bull ask us what we thought Boston's got? Do they care what we feel about this, or are they just trying to kind of slap their own logo on there? So we made these really awesome zines. I'll just kind of flip through some. We made these zines called Boston's Got, and we decided what we thought Boston had, or what Boston's got. And the kids designed all these really great pages. They say Boston's got family, Boston's got freedom, Boston's got power, Boston's got game, all kinds of things. So a lot of the words that you see in the court are the words that they came up with, and we published our zine together. So here's some close-ups. And then here are images of us working together. So So we just made it completely organically. We took the designs that the kids had drawn, the students had drawn, and we just started kind of going with them and painting all around the edges. And then we actually put, I don't know if I have pictures of them, but we actually put these cool chalkboards out on the fence that invited anyone to just almost do like a drawing on demand, like a doodle on demand. They could say, I want this in the basketball court. If they didn't feel comfortable doing it themselves, then they could just draw it out and we would just put it in the court. And they could write words and things like that. So even people who had not been my students, just neighbors nearby could come and be involved. And it was huge. There were people painting on the court all the time. So now, it's, I don't know, probably one of the biggest, most colorful basketball courts in the world. And this is just another smaller court that we had done. This was kind of like a test run that we'd done before it at this cool arts athletic space that a friend of mine had opened. So here's just another example of one half court. But then I wanted to show you a few more of the projects that NCAA has done, because we also show in galleries and museums and universities. Sometimes departing from basketball a bit, sometimes departing from the court. But this was a show that we put together called Hoops, From Swoops to Summit, and it is about, it's kind of like an imagined wing of the Basketball Hall of Fame, which is in Massachusetts. So I'm from Boston, and basketball was actually invented in Massachusetts in 1891. So it's just past its 125th anniversary. But we created an imagined wing of the Basketball Hall of Fame that would be dedicated to women's basketball history. So everyone in the collective was able to just choose a woman basketball player or coach or figure from the past and make a piece dedicated to her. And if you go into some of these history museums, even if it's not an art museum, there are so many handmade objects. In the Basketball Hall of Fame, there are felted jerseys and uniforms. There are painted basketballs, bronze sneakers. There's actually all these really beautiful examples of craft. So we were playing off of that and made all these handcrafted sort of like artifacts. My favorite being these pennants over here on the side. These are actually African-American women's basketball teams that were playing around the turn of the 20th century. So these are real historic teams. And I think my favorite one, which you can hardly see, but is the Gloom Chasers. So this is just a little bit of an illustration of what I just explained. So women's basketball has actually been a huge part of basketball since it was first invented by 1893. Women were playing at Smith College. Of course, they were playing in these giant like wool bags because, and they weren't, at first it's a game that's become netball, but at first they couldn't run or dribble because women weren't supposed to sweat, which I think is especially ironic considering they were wearing giant wool bags. But, now we sweat like everyone else. And there are the pennants again. You can see them a little better. Mysterious Girls. Smarter Set came about because there was a men's team called the Smart Set, and so there was a women's team that called themselves the Smarter Set. 20th Century Girls is good too. Field Days is a project that we did at Montserrat College of Art, where we created an installation inside their gallery to look like a track and field sort of setting, and we used the design from the 1984 LA Olympics sort of design book to come up with our motif. So we were sort of comparing this idea of the field day event that happens at the end of the school year as kind of like a utopian event that anyone with any athletic background can participate in because they're sort of absurd games, and we were comparing that to the sort of utopian / dystopian image of the Olympics today. It's a big celebratory event where the whole globe is involved, but a lot of the cities that the Olympics goes to end up in a lot of debt and having a lot of problems. So we were addressing all of those kinds of issues, but we ended up having a field day where you could participate in competitions that used craft and athletic-based skill sets. So here's us knitting a tennis net across our arms, knit a tennis net across our arms, and the woven lace three-legged race. So you had to learn how to do the fancy shoelace weaving first before you did your race. And then this is a birthday party that we threw for basketball last year. So this is happy birthday, basketball, 125th. So then this is just an event we did at the ICA for their teen night, but you can see in the background, this is the beginning of our Anarchy Acronyms project. So we were taking acronyms like the NCAA, like FIFA, like NASCAR, and we painted them on these chalkboard backdrops, these chalkboard boards, kind of like the logos that surround a stadium. And we asked students and participants to write in, what should these institutions stand for? Because a lot of them have become pretty corrupt and start embezzling money or taking advantage of their players. And so we were asking young people to hold the institutions accountable and try to reimagine, what should they be standing for according to our values. So this was the installation that we made, and this is like a, 160-foot or so temporary installation that we made on roofing paper behind the ICA, and the teens were able to make up their own rules according to these kind of abstract patterns that looked like court patterns. So then we brought the acronym Anarchy Project to Berlin, which was part of a show at this space called NGBK Gallery. It was artists that were making work about athletics and queerness and activism. So these are all like European, mostly football, because football is much bigger in Europe. So these are mostly European logos that we asked people to write in. You can see them a little bit closer. And then like Bridget said in our bio, we were invited to show our work to Congress. The Maker Caucus and the STEAM Caucus, which includes arts in the core curriculum for schools, invited us to show everyone what we were doing. And we were actually the only group at the Maker Caucus that wasn't 3D printing the things that we brought. And everyone thought that our basketball nets were 3D printed, which, they'll probably be doing that. But so I'm just going to skip ahead. I want to make sure I'm on time here. Okay. So again, we were kind of talking about bringing these projects across seas, right? So this past summer, I was invited by a collective out of Split, Croatia. And Croatia is, it's kind of parallel to Italy, just on the other side of the Adriatic. I meant to include an image of where it is, but if you're not sure, we can look it up. And so this group called Queer Sports Split invited me and the NCAA to come to Croatia and do a project with them. They had been knitting together as a group as well. And I find Croatia to be so interesting because it's a beautiful, coastal city. People go there for vacation. You can swim in the Adriatic Sea. It's quite luxurious. But it also has this very interesting history when you get into the city, because Croatia used to be a communist country, and only slightly recently is it a capitalist country. And so these are, I took a lot of photos of some of the recreational spaces that were built under capitalism. I'm sorry, that were built under communism, and then ended up becoming somewhat abandoned. And now that they're actually privately owned spaces, they're actually kind of still abandoned. There's this interesting dynamic now where they say that the spaces are a certain percent public and a certain percent private, and the public portion being something like 10%. But no one really knows what that means. They don't know if it means you can be on it 10% of the time, or if there's a small sliver of it that you're allowed to use. And so they basically just aren't used, and they're not really kept up either. Even seeing this kind of drooping soccer net or football net is not, that's more than you would see in a lot of spaces. And you can't tell in this image, but the AstroTurf, or whatever that is they use, the sod, is only rolled out on half of the fields. Like there's this huge roll of it sitting to the side. Like someone just didn't finish it. So, for me, this is ripe territory for artwork. I think this is so beautiful, right? So and here's another example. It's just, things that are just kind of laying there and finished. These are maybe going to be some bleachers, but you do have some nets on these soccer goals, so that's cool. This doesn't even have a rim at all. So this basketball court, the collective that invited us there, they chose for us to work on this court because it's the site of a lot of, well, actually no recreational activity at all. We asked all the neighbors, does anyone ever use this? And they said, no, like the most we ever do is bring our dogs to relieve themselves here. No one ever plays here. There's no way to play here. It's not very welcoming. But there are sometimes protests on this court. Where people are sort of asking, to be able to use the space. They're asking for the city to reveal their plans for the space so that they can know what's going on. So as we were walking around Split, I was noticing a lot of really interesting graffiti because I'm looking for public artwork. I'm thinking, where's all the artwork? I'm looking around. And for the most part, there wasn't a ton of public work, except for something I'll show you in a moment. But there was a lot of this graffiti, and it wasn't the kind of graffiti you see here where it's like someone's name, It's more like demands and concerns that citizens of the city have. So these are bits of graffiti that are written on the court. This one says traffic jam. Like this space will probably just become a traffic jam. This one, I believe, says we want, what is it? We want playgrounds, not parking lots. I don't speak Croatian, but and there's a few more that I didn't put up here. There's a phrase they say a lot called goop gloop, and gloop means stupid, and goop means grand urban plan. So it's like the stupid urban plan. And then there was another one that said, like development, or something like development is not a tool for exploitation. So the other thing that you would see around the city is this word hajduk, and you would often see 1950 or 1911. And this was all I was seeing, except for some of this other stuff that was scrawled around. I kept seeing this hajduk symbol everywhere, and I thought it was a brand. And it has part of the Croatian flag in the center. So I thought it was maybe connected to the country, but it seemed like a brand to me, and it was everywhere. The only public art that you would see was all about Hajduk. So we asked our friends, what is Hajduk? What is the deal with this? And they said it's our local football team. It's our local soccer team. Everyone's obsessed with it, and it blows something like the Red Sox out of the water. I mean, people are just obsessed, and it's only Hajduk. So we started looking into the history of Hajduk. What is this about? What does that even mean? And as the story goes, I think it was around 1911, which is when Hajduk was established, some college students went to their professor because they were trying to figure out what to name their team. And they said, what represents the best of our people? What should we name it? And the professor said, well, the Hajduk was historically, during the rule of the Ottoman Empire, they were kind of like these Robin Hood-esque bandits that would kind of steal from the rich and give to the poor. And some people saw them as trouble, and some people saw them as sort of like great warriors for the poor. And he said, the Hajduk represents the best of our people. And he gave a list of things that they stand up for, like friendship, caring for the poor, courage, strength, and all these like really beautiful ideals. But apparently, today Hajduk has become a bit of like an aggressive club. And so you can see there's imagery like this a lot, and they end up having huge rallies and sort of going up against the police. And some say that they're a bit racist, and they don't really represent the best of their people. They've become sort of bullies. And so some of the people that I was working with, we were trying to think of a way that we could speak to this or reach out to this. So, uh-oh. My thing is frozen. There we go. Oh, here's the historic image of the Hajduk. I think these are the guys that named it Hajduk. There we go. Oh, and here's more of what you see just all over the town, everywhere. So we decided to create a soft Hajduk. Sort of crafted logo. So we took all of these, what people actually call granny squares, and assembled them sort of in that Croatian flag layout. And the idea of using something soft in a public space or on a hard structure like a hoop or a net is to kind of sort of juxtapose those two things, right? Bring the softness to something hard. Remind everyone of the sort of original values of friendship and loving or sharing with the poor. And so we wanted to create a soccer net that would sort of nod to the original intent of Hajduk and kind of rejuvenate that idea. So we went in the night, well, partially in the day, and finished it in the night. And we actually macrameed our own soccer net onto the goal on that court I was telling you about. And we installed our Soft Hajduk logo. And it was pretty funny because, like I said, no one was ever on this court. It was like a ghost town. But then as soon as we installed our net, I mean, we were literally packing up our stuff to walk away. So here's our Soft Hajduk closer up. These little boys came out. And it was almost like putting a little, piece of cheese out for a mouse or something. Like they just kind of came creeping out of the brush and immediately started playing soccer. And the net worked beautifully. And I actually have a really quick video of it that I can show you guys. Oh, shoot. I thought I could get it real big. It was really cute because they kept like petting it. They kept going up to it and they said, "Oh, it's so beautiful." And they immediately recognized it as Hajduk. See if I can get one of the goal kicks in there. Penalty kicks, I mean. Yeah! So I'm almost finished. Almost finished here. Yeah, so and then we also made our classic basketball nets. We met at a bar a few times a week, and anyone could come and make the nets with us. So there are those installed. And then I was going to end the lecture with this, but I put it in the wrong place. I just wanted to share this awesome piece. This is my favorite piece of graffiti that we saw the whole time. It says, "I žene perde," which in Croatian means girls also fart. So we started making a basketball net that says girls also fart. And so we're going to put that around. This is the very last project I'll tell you about very quickly because it relates to what we're doing here this week. So 2 years ago, I was an artist in residence at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. And I was working with 10 different neighborhoods in Boston to create a giant piece that would reflect some of what we saw in the museum, as well as what we care about in our neighborhoods. So I had 4 classes with each of the groups. And for the first class, I had bought a bunch of thrift store garments at stores closest to their neighborhoods. And I just brought in a random selection and asked each student to choose one that they identified with. So they chose a garment, and then they drew that garment and kind of made up a story about a character that might have worn it before them. So you can see some of the drawings and some of the garments here. Then for the second class, they came to visit the Museum of Fine Arts, and we looked in the tag of the garment to see where in the world it was made. We found that country on a map of the world, and then we found it on a map of the museum and sort of observed the different kinds of shapes and different amounts of space that were given to those countries on those 2 different kinds of maps. And then we found artifacts in the museum made in the same place as our garments, and presumably by the ancestors of the people who make our clothes today. So here's us doing some drawings in the museum. And then so this is the technique we've been using all week. So then we use the drawing fluid and screen filler technique for making screen prints, where you can actually just paint your design right on. And I asked them to make original designs based on all the different drawings they've made from things in the museum and also from their garments. And so they came up with their very own textile patterns. We printed them repeatedly on a yard of made in America cotton, and everyone came up with their own textile. Then I took so this is them printing it here. Yep. I took one square of each of their textiles and cut it in half, so I had 2 triangles. I gave the rest to them, to the students, to make something that they could wear to the opening. And then I made a giant quilt from their small squares that basically mapped out the data that we found from our process. So you can see all these white lines in between are actually separating the different countries. So each neighborhood had its own color fabric it printed on. So you can see within one section of the map, there will be many different neighborhoods that made a piece, but that's all, like the centerpiece there is China, for example. I think there's a map. And then the thrift store garments were used to make these log cabin style quilts. So there's one for each neighborhood, and it kind of represents this idea of home, the log cabin. There we go. Here's the breakdown of all the different countries that we drew. So this was just from a random selection. So you can see China is very large. United States was actually a bit larger than I expected. India is very closely behind, or it's right there too. Vietnam, Bangladesh, a lot of places you might expect and other places you might not. A lot of the t-shirts tended to be made in the Caribbean or Central America. And then you can see we put the little tags on the country too, just like you have in the back of your shirt. So here's this piece. And then we also put tags of the neighborhoods on the smaller quilts, which are color-coded. Like the color that they ended up printing on is the border and the inside square for each neighborhood. So that's the end of my talk, and thank you. Thank you so much. I know it's early in the morning and I spoke for a while, but if anyone has any questions or even just wants to make a comment or say anything at all, there's a microphone right here. I'm so happy to talk more about anything you want to hear more about, and I can go back to any slides you need to. Oh, and while we're waiting, I'll play you a really very, very short video so you can see the whole court too. Don't be shy. There we go.
Were you allowed to paint on the basketball court?
Oh, maybe it needs to just get turned on.
Check.
Oh, there you go.
Were you allowed to paint on the basketball court?
That is a very good question, and I forgot to include that detail. So no, we just did it, no one noticed, and then, no. So we actually got permission from Parks and Recreation in the city of Boston, and I was really lucky as being an artist in residence for the city that I was sort of given that priority in a way. So this otherwise might have taken forever. Like I might have been asking the city over and over and over again and getting kind of ignored. But through this program, we got to sort of fast track it through, and we did get permission.
Thanks.
Yeah, good question.
If there, oh, sorry, applause? If you're thinking of doing more sports or going outside of just soccer and basketball, what sport would you do next?
Well, actually, I've done a lot of work about tennis. Ooh. I really like tennis, and it's one of the only sports I did not play competitively, but my mom is really good at it. And she took me to the 2015 US Open, and I got to see Venus and Serena play against each other. So I actually made a whole body of paintings and objects about that. And I think tennis is really cool because when you watch it on TV, they play men's tennis and women's tennis at the same time. You don't have to go to ESPN 5 to find women's tennis. So that's a really good one too.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. I'll just keep pressing this thing.
So, do you still paint, or do you do mostly, I think you kept calling it like soft work?
Oh,
Like with the
you were listening well.
soft, whatever, the
Yes,
knitting
yes.
and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. I call it soft. Yes, I do. And I mean, now I'm painting even larger than I ever did in terms of the courts. But I do continue to make small paintings, and I love making sketches. I love working in gouache. That is a happy medium for me, kind of between acrylic and oil paint. So, yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Do you have an idol or inspiration?
Oh, that is a wonderful question. Well, definitely Serena Williams is a huge inspiration and idol. But as far as artists go, I really love both Joseph and Ani Albers, they were a married couple, and Joseph made these paintings that were all about color and all the wonderful ways that colors play off of each other. And Ani was a weaver who made soft things a lot like I make. So sometimes I joke that my work is kind of like their art baby. That's a great question.
Considering the fact that it takes at least some amount of money to travel to other countries and do large art projects like these, did you receive any community funding? Did you raise the money yourself?
That's a very smart question. So I used to do everything kind of out of pocket. Not as much the traveling, maybe here and there. The nice thing about the project is you can bring it with you, even if you're going somewhere for another reason, you can just bring it with you. So I always bring the nets and the yarn with me, which is really affordable. And then I've done some Kickstarter campaigns, which raised money. And I've actually had a lot better luck with Kickstarter campaigns than I have writing huge grant proposals, because I find that my community is just really supportive. And a lot of times your friends show up faster than anyone else. But as my career has moved along, now I do get grants. Usually if I get a residency where I'm teaching, there is an artist fee where I get paid a certain amount for my labor, my work, and then there is a materials budget. And so usually the materials budget is a smaller amount, or it should be a smaller amount than the artist fee. Other times, like with the example in Split, Croatia, they did apply for a grant from their city to bring me over. So sometimes you kind of break even, sometimes you make money, you try not to lose money. It all kind of piles up at the end of the year. Yeah, good question.
Why is your basketball index so long?
Why are they so long?
Yeah.
Well, I think my favorite ones are the long ones, so I included them. And I mean, I guess I just like to break the boundaries a little bit, right? I mean, first of all, I didn't get to show you, I do have videos of people playing on them. And when they're long, there's just like this really nice motion that happens. And they also are a little bit better at rebounding because, the longer it is, the more, it's going to spit right out below. But we do make them short as well. Sometimes I just get started and I just can't seem to stop is the problem. Like you just have enough material and you keep going, so.
All right.
Good question.
How does your artwork positively inspire other people?
Well, that's a hard question to answer about yourself, right? But, well, I really want, particularly the young people I work with, I really want them to think about, like, how can they make the world the way they want it to be, right? Particularly in the context of sports and some of these places where you find so many logos and so much that's like thrown at you all the time. People are telling you like what you need to do, what you need to buy, and I like for people to think about what they can do for themselves too, because it's liberating and it's empowering to be able to do something for yourself. And so I really hope that people can learn how to do things for themselves and imagine how they would like it to be. And hopefully it works.
Is there any place in the world that you haven't gone yet that you would like to go to work on artwork?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. Well, I would love to go to Mexico. I actually have not been to Mexico. You know, and I love to go anywhere too where I can study the very, very old and ancient sort of practices of different sports. I think there was a game that was played in Mexico that was kind of like basketball that involves like a rubber ball. So I kind of have dreams of visiting. I think there might be a few spaces that still exist where they played, and I don't know what it's called. But yeah, I think that's all I got for right now. But there's a million places I'd love to go. It was a very good question.
Why did you start doing this? Like, do you want to inspire people, or do you want to try and stop the earth from becoming a wasteland of factories and like?
Yeah, definitely. All of that. I want to do anything as small as sort of like make someone smile or just kind of look over when they might not have, you know, just pay attention. Anything as small as that to as big as, yeah, like changing the world or the whole system. But that's obviously not something I can do by myself. So that's why I like to collaborate with people and see how many people you can get on board. Because sometimes it's about the process and just seeing what you can do together and how big you can really go. Yeah, that's a really good question. Thanks.
What do the images on the outside of the court represent?
Oh, well, so they're all based on the drawings that our students did. So they're all, I only showed you 4 of the drawings, but there were tons and tons of them. So they don't really represent any particular thing other than their visions. And they're all just kind of like doodles that we sort of plucked out. Again, there is some Foursquare and some little chalkboard areas where you can draw, but for the most part, it's just like abstract, fun, vibrant mark making. Yeah.
What was the most rewarding moment during your projects?
During any particular one?
All of them?
All of them? I think the most rewarding moment is when a student or anyone I'm working with who has been a little bit confused or doubtful, like when it suddenly clicks for them, which often happens. I mean, even with the court, obviously my students knew what a basketball court was and they were making the drawings, but I don't think they really believed me that we were going to do this. I kept saying, we're gonna make a basketball court, it's gonna be awesome, and they were like, okay. And then it wasn't until we were actually just out there painting the whole thing that they were like, oh, wow, this is really happening. We're really doing this. And that's always super rewarding when they suddenly realize that it's possible. Like you can believe that it's possible. Yeah.
So how long did it take for you guys to finish it?
So we worked on it for a couple of weeks. And our process, 2.5 weeks, our process took a little longer than some things because we factored in a ton of time for working with the community and talking with the community. And I hired other adult artist friends of mine to help with some of the younger kids who hadn't worked on this scale before with paint. But my first priority always was taking time. If somebody walked by and had a question or a response or a concern, I would always stop and talk to them. So it took a little longer because of that, but I think it was very important and rewarding.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. So you would consider yourself a baller, right?
A baller?
Yeah, okay.
Sort of, yeah.
sure.
My handling has gone down, but I still have a good shot.
What is your favorite team and or player?
Oh, man. Well, I mean, I wish I watched more sports now because I'm so busy. It's just crazy. But again, like the Serena Williams is just huge. Like you just kind of can't beat her, right? I mean, she's been called the greatest athlete in the world, at least the greatest tennis player. I mean, who doesn't love Steph Curry? And I'm a really big fan of the sportscaster Jamel Hill as well.
My dad loves him.
Yeah, she's awesome. Yeah, but I need to get back like on my stats and watching more. But I'm like always making. So it's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, do you have one?
No.
Sorry, we're over.
But I wanted to thank you for those great questions. I think we're going to have some of Maria's classwork exhibited somewhere around the school or at the middle school, so you get a chance to see some of the work that her students did. I wanted to thank Mr. Scranton, Mr. McDonald, Ms. Burnett, and Mrs. Nicholson for all their work that they did with Maria this week. And if you have any other further questions for Maria, you can stop down and ask. Thank you very much.
Thanks.